Good morning, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Barry.
The one less vote now, of course, is needed for the government from the crossbenchers when they need to pass legislation. Have you just lost some of your political clout?
It would be fair to say that the crossbenchers have just lost a little bit of leverage, but they have clearly lost, and myself included, lost less than what some commentators might conclude. You know, the fact is the government doesn't know when they will need us. They don't know where the votes will come from when they have particular pieces of legislation up. So they will need to keep the four of us on side. They're certainly not going to be foolish enough to burn any one of us. An interesting case in point is the means test for the private health insurance rebate. You know, that's an almost $3 billion black hole in the government's budget at this stage. Tony Windsor has voted against it repeatedly, which keeps me in play on that one particular issue. So, look, as we go through the next 2 years, and it will be 2 years now, which I think is in the public interest, they will need all of us from time to time.
When you say, though, that they wouldn't want to burn you, why? Why not? What would you do?
Well, for two reasons. First of all, they need me for some pieces of legislation over the next 2 years, and the example I gave is a good example, I think, of the private health insurance means test, which I favour. But also, more strategically, you know, they don't know when they might find themselves back where they were last Wednesday with only a one-seat margin. You know, we've got the Craig Thompson affair. The opposition and the media are going to go hard against Peter Slipper. Something else might bubble up. There's any number of reasons why the government might find itself back with a one-seat majority, and I'm sure they're smart enough to know they shouldn't have burned Andrew Wilkie in case they need him again as one of the crucial 4 votes.
Yes, but when you say that, don't burn me, you mean by that you would be then prepared to take out punishment on the government rather than treat every issue on its merit?
Well, no, I do treat every issue on its merits, and I think I've got a voting record to prove that. And in fact, I think all of my colleagues have got a voting record to prove that. I think we have shown that we take issues on merit, and sometimes we vote in favour of things, sometimes we vote against.
OK, on that issue that you are concerned about, in particular poker machine reform, are you 100% comfortable with the assurances that you've been given that the government will stay with the deal on mandatory pre-commitment?
Yes, I am, Barry. The Prime Minister was good enough to ring me at about 8:30 Thursday morning to forewarn me of Harry Jenkins' resignation as Speaker. And at that stage, it was a brief phone conversation, but in general terms, she assured me that, you know, as far as she's concerned, our agreement stands. I then met with the Prime Minister for about half an hour on a Thursday evening, and we spoke in detail about the agreement. You know, we both made it quite clear to each other that, you know, we both regard the agreement as standing. We spoke in detail about poker machine reform, and the Prime Minister made it quite clear the government remains committed to that. But I tell you what, Barry, that they remain committed to it not just because they have an agreement with me they want to honour, but they have, over the whole of the last year, genuinely had their heart in poker machine reform. And I think this has been lost on some people through the year. You know, people have assumed that the government has been, you know, just forced to do this and they don't want to do it. But in fact, the Prime Minister and Jenny Macklin, the relevant minister, they're good people with a good heart, and they do want to bring about poker machine reform. They do know it is popular, that this would be a popular reform. So there's any number of reasons why they will push on with it, and it will be much easier now because they are one vote closer to having the numbers. They now only need the support of 3 crossbenchers instead of 4, and that's a significant change from the government's point of view. And also, the government now is able to prosecute these reforms much more clearly as wanting to do it, and not because, you know, someone's holding a gun to their head. And this is something the poker machine industry has had a field day with. You know, the poker machine industry has been saying time and time again over the last year, the government doesn't have its heart in it, the government doesn't want to do this, the government's only doing this because it's being forced to do it by Andrew Wilkie. Well, now that whole narrative is put aside. Now it is absolutely clear, but I've known this all along, but it's absolutely clear now for the community the government is progressing these reforms because the government thinks it's good public policy and it wants to bring about the change.
If that's true, then why within 24 hours of the numbers changing did we start reading stories in the paper about trials, that they might look at trials rather than going straight to pre-commitment?
Barry, there's nothing new in that. The Productivity Commission recommended a trial. From the start, I have supported the Productivity Commission's recommendation. This has been discussed a number of times over the last year. The Tasmanian government volunteered to host the trial many months ago now, and that was well reported. Unfortunately, the Tasmanian government rolled over because the poker machine operator in the state refused to cooperate. But now I understand that there is still talk continuing about a trial in the ACT, and I'd like to see a trial.
OK, now that you mentioned a conversation you had with Julia Gillard at 8:30, so that was half an hour before the former Speaker, Harry Jenkins, resigned. Did she tell you then that the government was going to throw its support behind Peter Slipper?
She did. She indicated that the government would be nominating Peter Slipper. Look, there's nothing remarkable about that either. For the 15 months of this parliament, you know, everyone has understood that one of the possible turns of events would be that Harry Jenkins would return to the government benches, and that Peter Slipper in particular would be invited to step up. And I am very surprised that for the last year the opposition has gone so hard against Peter Slipper. You know, if the opposition had had any sense, they would have wrapped him in cotton wool and kept him as happy as possible, because he was always the first person probably on the rank to move to the Speaker's chair.
So what did you think when she told you that? What did you think that said about the government's judgment? Did you have any comment to make?
Well, I think it's a stunning political move. Of course it is very unusual, but this parliament is very unusual. We haven't had a power-sharing parliament since the Second World War, and things have, you know, had to be done differently. And, you know, there is nothing unconstitutional or illegal. It's just unusual what has occurred. And, you know, sure, it's in the political self-interest of the government, but it's also in the public interest, because now we have, I think, a much more robust government, one that is not on a knife edge, one that is now set to go for its full term, and that must be in the public interest. Regardless of whether you vote Labor or Liberal or National or Greens, I do think it's in the public interest that a government, when it's elected, it does go full term. And I think it can now perhaps be a little more ambitious with its legislative agenda, because now it will be that little bit easier to get the support of the crossbench. Not that this government probably needs to be any more ambitious with its legislative agenda, having just got through the carbon tax and the mining tax, and we're now bearing down on poker machine reform. But
if that was your initial response and you thought there might be some positives to all of this, why did you then urge Rob Oakeshott to accept the nomination from the coalition as for Speaker?
Yeah, no surprises there, and I've spoken about this in the last couple of days. I encouraged Rob to stand. For a number of reasons. For a start, Rob would make a very good Speaker, and given his passionate interest in reform of the Parliament and doing things better, he was a logical choice to be a Speaker. So first and foremost, I thought he would be a good Speaker. And look, I'm not going to gild the lily here. The fact is too that it's in the political self-interest of the crossbenchers that the government have very, very tight numbers, because that does maximise our leverage. I think also it would be a good thing if the Parliament has a choice. You know, why should there be only one nominee? Why not put it to a ballot as we put it to a vote, as we did put it to a vote for the Deputy Speaker?
So why did Rob Oakeshott not accept the nomination?
Oh, you'd have to ask Rob that. But right from the start of my encouragement, he seemed fairly disinterested. I think you know, the events of 15 months ago are long behind him, and you know, for whatever reason, he wasn't interested in being nominated.
Because he knew he wouldn't have the numbers?
Look, I don't know what was in his mind, but I don't think that would have been the reason, because I think he would have been a popular choice among the crossbench, and I think it is quite possible he would have been successful. Having said that, I have no concerns with Peter Slipper. I've got to know Peter over the last 15 months. He strikes me as a decent chap. I'm not aware of any hard evidence that would preclude him from being the Speaker. He certainly has the technical skills, so I'm just as happy with Peter being there.
And there's no fear that an investigation into his travel entitlements and other matters might turn something up?
Well, who knows? I have no idea of the facts of that matter. The fact is, you're either fit to sit in the Parliament or you're not. He is fit to sit in the Parliament at this stage. But, you know, if he was to be found guilty of wrongdoing, well, that, you know, obviously he would have to step aside. But, you know, that hasn't happened at the moment, and we need to be very, very careful with all of these accusations that are being thrown around, because every accusation now is thick with politics and thick with the venom of the opposition, who have been outsmarted and are mighty cranky about it. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a story about Peter Slipper on the front page of The Australian every second day for the next 2 years.
Okay, well, you started out by mentioning the impact on legislation. We could just clear up a couple of those things. And you mentioned private health insurance, and the government's attempting, of course, to means test the rebate. So what will your position be on that if it's to come up for vote early next year?
Well, I went public some months ago and said that I do support a means test on the private health insurance rebate, so long as the settings are right, the threshold's right, and they seem to be. The fact is that that private health insurance rebate is costing the budget about $5 billion a year. It's set to double in less than a decade, about eight years, I think, and that's unsustainable. So as nice a benefit it is for people like me, we simply can't afford to maintain that, and credible treasury modelling shows that it will not have a significantly adverse effect on the public health system. Now, having said all that, I was looking at this many months ago. It's gone off the boiler. I'll just want to go back and check it all again. But so long as nothing has changed in the figures, I assume I'd support that.
And if the government was to put up the Malaysian solution again for a vote, how would you vote on that?
Oh, I would definitely not support that. And in fact, it was the denial of my vote, along with the denial of Adam Bance and Tony Crook's votes. It was the denial of those three votes that meant the government didn't bring that on for a vote in the chamber. I would not support it, but of course now the government is in a much better position, so long as it maintains that two-seat majority, is in a much better position and probably could get it through, although I would certainly not support it, and it would really struggle to get it through the Senate.
Andrew Wilkie, thanks for your time this morning. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Barry.